In general, in the small differences between the countries, but nothing of significant magnitude. It's between 20 and 25% of the crypto owners that are women, meaning that there is more than 75% men and a 3-to-1 relationship, in the sense that for every female crypto owner, there are 3 male crypto owners.
Anders, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us today. It's a real pleasure meeting you.
Thanks, Chris. Likewise, really good to meet you and to read more about your magazine.
Great. So I'm looking forward to a good chat. But just before we start, for those that haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, can you briefly tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Mats Ribe. I'm an associate partner at EY Law in Norway, leading both our digital assets and our AI practice. Been working in this space since 2017 when I joined EY, and as a commercial lawyer since 2012. Over to you, Anders.
Yes, thank you. My name is Helseth. I am the head of research at K33, formerly known as Arcane Crypto. We are a Norwegian headquartered crypto company doing 3 different things. We do crypto research, which is the division I am leading. We run an automated brokerage for people to trade larger volumes, and it's open for people across all the Nordics and Europe. And we also have a crypto fund where we actively manage your money if you park them with our fund.
Okay, amazing. Well, thanks for the intro. And today we're talking about the series of reports that you carried out recently about the level of crypto adoption across the Nordic countries, which I think is a fascinating subject. And having taken a look at the reports, I had a look at the individual reports per country and also at the global one that you did for the Nordics. I think that the first question that pops to my mind is that you've identified different levels of adoption across age groups, genders, and across the different countries. So I'm really keen to understand what's, in your view, driving these different types of adoption.
Great question. If you look at between the different countries to start off with, then what we have found is that the adoption rate is basically equal in Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, where about 7% of the adult population own cryptocurrencies. The adoption rate is a bit higher in Norway, where it's 2 percentage points higher at 9%. So there we find a difference. To explain exactly that difference, why Norway is 2 percentage points ahead of the other countries, we do not have the exact answer for that. But what we see is that they are in the ballpark of each other, 7%, 9%. It's not the same, but it's in a similar ballpark, so that we see that across the Nordics, the adoption rate is quite similar. That is not surprising, and is as expected. But then we have the other kind of demographics here, as you alluded to, where we see that young people, they are much more inclined to own cryptocurrency than older people. And the explanation for that is kind of the difference between younger people and older people. The younger are more curious on new technology. They, I would guess, find it less intimidating than the older generation, and because cryptocurrencies, they are not that easy to understand, like really understand. So there I think we find a generational gap where the older, which is not that familiar with technology, they find the unknown in this case to be a bit frightening. So, oh no, this can't be something because I don't fully understand it. And the reflex is then to say, oh, it's not something for me. Whereas the younger generation has a better innate feel for this. So even though they don't understand it fully, they have a better feeling for it, and they're also more positive towards it. So and they want to not necessarily invest a lot in it, but they are investing a little to kind of get a feel for it, to learn, to say.
There was also a difference in the rates of adoption based on gender. Is that correct?
That is very, very much correct. In general, in the small differences between the countries, but nothing of significant magnitude, it's between 20 and 25% of the crypto owners that are women, meaning that there is more than 75% men, and a 3-to-1 relationship, in the sense that for every female crypto owner, there are 3 male crypto owners. That is also not super surprising, but it's interesting to have evidence for it. We see that in investments in general, there is also a significant gender gap. For instance, if you look at stocks, the gender gap is generally about 30 to 1/3 women and the rest men. So the gap is slightly less, for instance, in stocks and crypto, but they are also in the same ballpark. And if you look further into crypto, stocks is even more common, at least across the wider, the entire population, than crypto. So crypto is kind of a mixture between gaming, stocks, a bit of gambling. And if you look at gaming and gambling, that is even more male dominated than traditional investments. So finding that the gender gap for cryptocurrencies is slightly bigger than traditional assets, but in the same ballpark is kind of as expected, I would say.
And just to add to that point, the surveys were conducted on a representative population, right, by Norstat in each country, and we have conducted that survey for Norway for a couple of years now, while in the Nordics this was the first crypto adoption survey conducted. And we saw that when we presented the results, we had a panel also discussing various items around these topics and the findings. And one thing that was highlighted in terms of the gender gap was that perhaps many of the, let's say, service providers have a very kind of male-dominated focus and design. And so perhaps there is a possibility there so to actually make it more interesting and easier for also females to increase their adoption, while to not only kind of focus on perhaps a more kind of traditional financial design and wrapping around the services, but actually have a more, let's say, more wider focused in the services that is being developed and offered to the market.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's very interesting. Now, I know that at the very beginning, the crypto was a little bit like the Wild West, and there was a lot of skepticism amongst general investors into just putting holding any crypto assets. But what we've seen is that with the arrival of MiCA, there's been some reassurance in the markets, in the European markets, as to the legitimate nature of crypto. And my question is, how do you expect that additional regulation in this space will impact the level of adoption? Have we reached the peak of adoption of crypto, or you were expecting to keep growing as regulation comes into the space?
Absolutely, I think it's a good point, because we see that regulation, it might to some degree hinder innovation, right? If you over-regulate a particular market. We've seen that within AI as well, right? There was concerns initially with the new AI Act whether or not it would actually hinder innovation. But I think with markets in crypto asset regulation coming from the EU now, it actually will increase adoption. Because it creates certainty and it creates foreseeability in the market, and the players then know what to really focus on, and that it won't be like you see parts in the US, right, with no particular regulation, that there are uncertainty in terms of how the US SEC, the financial authorities, will kind of interpret existing rules. Well, in Europe, you will have specific regulation. It will be hopefully more harmonized across the different jurisdictions and the interpretation of it between the different financial authorities. And that might actually accelerate innovation. And so we see that lots of US-based companies are now considering to move to Europe because it's more foreseeability in the European market. And hopefully that can actually then both increase adoption, but as important, it might allow the institutional investors and the banks and the financial institutions to potentially move in to this segment because it's then more safer and more regulated and more foreseeability among those players who are already regulated by the financial authorities today.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I think the Nordics are well known globally for being very digitally savvy populations with very high level of innovation and technology adoption. What role does this comfort or this familiarity with technology plays in the overall adoption of crypto when you compare the Nordics to other regions around the world?
Definitely plays into it. It depends a bit on who you are comparing to, because, for instance, if you go to the United States, they are ahead of the Nordics in terms of crypto adoption. Whereas if you go to other parts of the world, they are probably behind. We do not have the exact numbers for the global crypto adoption, but as we see in many other fintech applications, we see that the Nordics are generally quite in front. And also, if you go back to gaming, as I alluded to previously, if you go back to the early 2000s, there were lots of great Nordic gamers, way overrepresented among the world's best.
Right.
I would definitely believe, without knowing the global crypto adoption, there are done surveys, but it's very hard to understand how good those surveys really are, because it depends very much on how you do a survey, which result you get.
I'm also keen to understand whether you've seen any economic impact in the Nordics specifically as the adoption of crypto has increased over the past few years. Are we still talking just about people owning a different type of asset, or is that really having any impact on the economy itself?
I definitely think it's a factor, right? The economic condition generally is definitely a factor also for cryptocurrencies. But it does kind of it does kind of have its own way. I mean, the market has its own way as well, right? So because it's really driven not necessarily only by the kind of the existing market condition generally, or the financial condition, is driven also by technology advancements. It's driven by regulation, and it's driven by kind of new innovation. There's lots of innovation coming into the space, and that's why we've seen for the past years different waves, right, in terms of what is actually being developed and what is currently hot in terms of ICOs, NFTs, security tokens, and whatnot. So we definitely see lots of different waves, and so it kind of lives its own. It has its own factor, but definitely it. You saw that a really big increase during COVID, for instance, right, with really, really low interest rates. And so I definitely think that's a factor, but it has kind of its own nature as well. I'm not sure if you have any.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I also think most Nordic crypto owners, they view crypto as an investment asset, and they do not use it for anything other than that per se. So because if you look at the Nordics, and as we also have been into that, we are quite far forward on the fintech side. So you have lots of, if you are within the boundaries of the law, and then you have good solutions to do things fast and efficiently in general in the financial system in the Nordics. Underlying, there are many things where crypto could improve it, but like the top surface layer is quite good for consumers.
I just want to clarify. So if we leave aside the volatility and the risk profile of cryptocurrencies versus more traditional assets, from a taxation perspective, from the way that the central banks see these assets, is there any difference in the way that the Nordics tax returns on crypto investments when compared to other types of investment vehicles?
At least the Norwegian tax authorities has been one of the more forward-leaning tax authorities actually globally. They were the first tax authorities, at least to my knowledge, that issued a guidance on how to tax crypto assets. They launched a house actually in Decentraland in the metaverse in order to learn and meet kind of young people, right, who had kind of questions around crypto assets. And so they've been really, really forward-leaning, but there's definitely a difference because stocks have some, let's say, advantages in how it's being taxed. And also it's much more easier, right? Because when you invest in stocks or through a fund, that's being reported in many cases automatically. While in crypto, you need to do it yourself, right? So you need to be very diligent in actually reporting all of the transactions and all of your values. And at least in the past, it's been highlighted as quite kind of difficult in order to understand how to report your crypto assets. This has become perhaps more easy now with some particular guidance, I think across all Nordic countries. And we've seen for this particular report, we've seen interest both from the Norwegian and the Swedish tax authorities who wanted to understand more of the numbers from our crypto adoption service.
Okay. Now we just briefly touched upon the possibility of or the use case for crypto as a cross-border payment mechanism. My question now is, what needs to happen for cryptocurrencies to be adopted as a mainstream mechanism for payment in general that we can use on our daily basis?
That's a good question. I think you have to define. Here we have to be really careful in what we call cryptocurrencies and what we mean by it. For instance, what I would call a cryptocurrency is the Bitcoin, Ether, Solanas, like the native tokens of these networks, which is not a currency issued by any government. So for those to be used as money, that's what we are describing here, they would have to become more accepted as money. And if we look at the development curve over the last 10 years, it has not, those types of cryptocurrency assets, they have not really gathered steam as a means of exchange. Almost if you go back and to the darknet still exists, but Bitcoin, for instance, was used for darknet payments 10 years ago. Whereas now today, it has shifted to Monero, also cryptocurrency. But other than that, we don't see these cryptocurrencies widely used as payments. What we see more and more used as payments is tokenized dollars, aka stable coins. And that is also a kind of a cryptocurrency. It depends on how you define it. But there you have, I would say, stable coins. They use blockchains and the blockchain network to transfer regular currency. So I would not call that a cryptocurrency transfer. I would call that tokenization of money. So the tokenization of money, that is gathering momentum very quickly. It's more and more used for especially cross-border payments. We have participated or helped people in lots of different industries do that. So I think if you say that for cryptocurrency as payments, if that includes tokenization of regular currencies using blockchain networks as payment rails, I think it can grow substantially in the coming years.
I agree, and we see now with the asset reference tokens and e-money tokens will be regulated now and enter into force in June in the EU. And that means that the issuers of those tokens, for instance, Euro token, will then be regulated, right, by a financial authority in Europe. And that might then create a trust which hasn't been there until now. And we see a couple of past incidences, right, when it comes to stablecoins who have suddenly collapsed in value because they actually didn't have the reserves that they alluded to. And so with some players then in Europe coming now with potential an Euro token and actually being regulated by a financial authority, that might create that particular trust and then thereby increasing adoption massively, because you then have an instrument who can be transferred much more efficiently across borders throughout Europe at least.
When we talk about crypto, we often hear a lot about crypto on social media, right? And that's I think that's also part of the danger, that everyone can cast their opinions and then make them broadly available, and perhaps it may cause some distrust. So to what extent do you think social media and activity in social media is impacting the perception that cryptocurrencies have, especially in the Nordic markets?
I think they are a two-edged sword, to say, in a sense. I definitely think a lot of people get their first experiences from, I would say, crypto influencers on the different social networks. And that is perhaps their gate into owning a bit of cryptocurrency. And in that sense, you can say that there's a larger set of people finding out about this and being able to, in the next step, make their own judgments on this, whether they can use it for something, whether they want to invest in it. And that in itself is good. Also, how many of these influencers, especially on social media, how they act, it doesn't exactly provide confidence for people not that versed into TikToks and or used to that type of content. So it both draws in people, I think, but it also helps make it, for those who are negative towards crypto, make it look a bit unserious.
Right. Okay, maybe just to wrap up our conversation today, I'd love to get your take on what would you think it would be the real impact that cryptocurrencies will have in the general population in the Nordics if we think in the next 5 years. Is there any material impact that it will have beyond just having an additional asset class and maybe some functionality for cross-border payments, or what's your take on this?
I think with now particular regulation that's coming throughout Europe now with the MiCAR, I think that might lead to, let's say, corporates and financial institutions at least considering to move into this market, or at least partner up with some players, right, which are focusing on the crypto market. And that again might lead to a infrastructure development. And if you have innovation into and kind of an increase in using blockchain technology as infrastructure, that might lead to a massive adoption without actually people necessarily realizing or thinking that they are using cryptocurrencies. So that depends a bit on the use case. It depends a bit about how, let's say, banks and other financial institutions now are kind of moving towards this particular market. We see lots of interest, at least. Lots of banks want to kind of increase their knowledge. And so that's going to be interesting to follow on in a couple of next years to see how it changes the, let's say, the infrastructure, because that I think really is the key to drive adoption, is for people to use it, but not necessarily understand that they use it, right? Just like internet, not many people actually understand, like let's say, the protocols underlying internet, but we still use it in our daily life.
All right. Well, I think we saw that there was a little bit of a change in tone in 2023 because the news cycle was completely taken over by AI. But clearly, crypto continues to make very strong inroads into the economy, especially in the Nordics. So it's still a fascinating space to watch. And especially with just how fast things are changing and how adoption is growing. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye out on this space. And I just would like to thank you for your time and for sharing all these very valuable insights with us.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for taking the time to have this interview.
Mats, Anders, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.